next. I'm also struck when everybody here speaks. There's a common theme through everything that's said. It's not explicit, but it's implied in it that all of you have spoken about the work that's done at sort of a grassroots level, community level, or within a business, and then equally about the messaging from the top, the global level, and the need to achieve net zero. And if I were to ask my grandmother, she might not know what net zero means, but she would equally know that there are problems in our community. But in the middle, when we talk to everybody, there's a bit of a disconnect or a bit of a gap, and it seems sometimes that our national governments in particular are a little slower to galvanise an action to where we need them to be to help globally deliver those goals and locally to empower communities either with the resources or the funding that's needed. What specifically do you think might be important to bring our national politicians? I'm not just talking about in Ireland now, for anybody who's in the room, I'm talking about globally, the national politicians and also national policy. What's important in bringing that to the fore when it comes to addressing climate challenges?
Leadership, really. And there's an American philosopher, Mary Parker Follett, who said leadership is not so much about the exercise of power, but about that capacity to create that sense of power amongst those who are led. The real role of a leader is to create more leaders. And I think that we have good leadership in terms of Ireland's, and Theo, I think you mentioned it, in terms of our credibility internationally. We're on the Security Council at the moment. I know Geraldine Byrne-Mason, who is our ambassador in the UN, has tried to put climate change on the agenda for the Security Council. It has been resisted by others for different reasons. It has been vetoed by others for different reasons. In fact, one of the laggards in that is actually Russia, who sits on the Security Council, and the reason they resisted it because of the importance of hydrocarbons to Russia. But I think you don't give up on that point, and I think at an international level, you have to continue to try and make those institutions work. I think we as when it comes down to a state like Ireland that has incredible soft power, it has also to look at itself, and I think the point again that Theo raised, that our individual carbon footprint is probably one of the greatest of any society, and that's a penalty, because I've seen in my own time in service in Mali, for instance, the desertification as an impact of climate change. The way climate change is driving insecurity between indigenous groups as they compete for reducing resources. And I think it's critically important that, you know, from a national point of view, we get our house in order with regards to our ambitions. We have targets in our climate action plan. We're looking at 5 gigawatts of offshore renewable energy by 2030. We won't quite reach that. We have institutions that we must ensure are properly tooled in terms of on board Penola, the Marine Area Regulatory Authority, National Parks and Wildlife. They all must be properly resourced, because setting targets but not resourcing for them means that you're actually not going to be able to deliver. But then I think local authorities have a role too, and I'm here with Michael Boyle today to look at what Mayo is doing. And Mayo has been given great leadership from my perspective in terms of areas that are within its gift. And I think the opportunity for Mayo in areas such as renewable energy, such as biodiversity net gain, restoration of vulnerable ecosystems. People don't quite realise that 1 square kilometre of coastal area with seagrass, for instance, is a multiple of 1 square kilometre of the rainforest in Brazil in the context of its capacity to absorb carbon. So I suppose coming back to climate change is made by people, and we can drive our influence in 2 ways: what we do ourselves individually, but also how we influence our politicians in the context of making sure that our concerns with regards to climate change are really at the top of the agenda. And then there is, you know, the issues around what we do as individuals in terms of the energy we use. So we need to go from carbon-driven energy generation to renewables. How we use our transport, we need to go to renewable types of transport. We need to look at our nutrition. As individuals, we eat too much meat, and that's a reality, and there's no getting around it. You can dress it up all you want, but the reality is the carbon footprint associated with our nutrition is phenomenal, and that needs to change. And I think the final piece is just a phrase that I've heard John Kerry talk about, internalised externalities. We need to take responsibility for everything we do. The reason that coral reef was destroyed by the fisher is because he didn't have to pay the price of reconstructing a coral reef. The reason those fish were fished out was the fisher didn't have to pay the price of replacing them. We need to actually internalise all the actions that we take so that we take the total cost and we are actually responsible for that total cost in our actions, and then we can start moving towards a sustainable side. And one final point is, the framework for all this was actually led between Ireland and Kenya in 2015 when we codified through the United Nations the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And I think it's worth all our while to keep on looking at those goals and seeing how I as an individual can actually make a difference with regards to those goals. And one of those goals, goal 5, which is about gender equality, is a critical piece, and I think you spoke about that in the context of Africa, enabling and empowerment of women in society sometimes where they're not employed, they're not in the political system, or they're actually not educated. It's critically important towards sustainability that this gender equality side is dealt with.
Thank you.